Hello everyone. In this class, we will be making our hands dirty with Kubernetes. What we will do is we will use a simple application. We will create the Docker image. Then we will deploy that Docker image with help of the Kubernetes. This is the simple Spring Boot applications with a dependency of a Spring Boot starter and Spring Boot Starter Web. Also, I have added a dependency of the actuator. Also, also in the application dot properties, just have defined the name of the applications, server port, and this is done for some other use, but we don't need these to demonstrate a simple application. And also, I have added some management detail for the actuator. Okay, and the same applications I also have put into the GitHub as well. So I will put the link for the GitHub, and you should be able to download that using the GitHub. So let us start this application locally and see how it works. So I already had started this application. Let me stop it. Let me start. And there is a Iron Fist URI that has been exposed, and it will return me Iron Fist string. So let me go back to the Postman, and here I can run it, and it is returning me Iron Fist string. So the idea is to generate this application's image, and then we push this image into a Docker Hub, and then we create our pod and service object and run our first applications in the Kubernetes. What we will do is, with the help of the Docker files, which is already part of the application as well, and it is also available in the Git as well. In the Docker file, it is a very simple Docker files. It uses the JDK 17 Slim version. Under the work directory, I am copying the jar that is generated after building the application. It is copied under the app, and there is an entry point. So this is all needed for generating the image from the Docker file. Now let us build image from my Docker file. So Docker build, the command is Docker build -t cup of Java tech, and then my image name Iron Fist and the version, and want to build image from my current directory. So it will go ahead and push the create the image. So my image got generated. Now I want to push this image to the Docker registry. So the command for that is Docker push, and then cup of Java tech, and then my image name Iron Fist, and then version 1. So this image will get pushed there. Already have built this image earlier, so it did not take too long time, but as soon as I do this, my image gets pushed to the Docker Hub, and if I go to the Docker Hub, I should be having this image pushed there. Yeah, so sometimes back this image got pushed, and now I have got a Docker image registered into the Docker Hub. The reason to do this is because Kubernetes does not pick images that is built into the local. It picks images from the central registry. That is why we need to push these images into the Docker registry. Otherwise, it will say that image pulling failed because it did not find this image into the central registry. Now we already have generated the Docker image. And now what we will do is we will use this Docker image to generate our deployment objects. As you remember, in one of earlier class, I had explained you that generally we wrap Docker, we wrap a pod inside the deployment objects in the Kubernetes, and then use that. If we check the help command of the Kubernetes. So kubectl help, we can find at various command. One of them is create command. So let us further check what is a create command does. Kubectl create help, and we can see that these can help us to create many different type of objects. One of them is a deployment object. So we will leverage this facility to generate deployment objects through the declarative option. So we will use the kubectl command for doing most of the stuff, like if you want to generate the deployment object, or if you want to see the detailed status of the deployment objects, and in the subsequent lecture we will explore some more objects like service objects, volume objects, config map, all those things. We use a deployment object for generating any kind of things, any kind of objects. So kubectl is a central command that we use for most of the things. So now let us use this kubectl command for generating a deployment object. So kubectl deployment on, actually it is create deployment. I want to give the name, and then I want to also provide the detail about my image and curve of Java Tech, cup of Java Tech, and Iron Fist and version 1. So let us hit enter and see. So now my deployment objects has been created, and if I look at get deployment, so kubectl get deployments is to see all the deployments available here. So here we are able to see that Iron Fist name has been given to the my deployment, the same as one we specified, and what is the age of this deployment, and ready 1 and 1. The right side one is one that how many objects got created, and the left side is it created successfully or not. If it is not been created successfully, then here we would have got some other, we would have got 0 over here. So now it is a successfully created, that is why it is giving me a 1. Similarly, I can use the kubectl get command to get the pods detail. So here I have got a pods detail also. So inside the deployment I have got a pod, and this pod name is, it is generated automatically, and this is my pod that got generated. Further, we can drill down and check more about the pod and deployment options. Let us first explore a pod. So kubectl describe, that is another command for describing, scribe, describe, to describe a specific object. For example, I want to describe the pod. So I will say kubectl describe pod, and then give the name of that deployment object, pod object, and then if I hit enter, I should be able to get more detail about the pod. So here if you look at it, this is my pod. Pod has been placed into the name of the pod. It is inside the default namespace. We also can specify a specific namespace, and in that one we add the object, but we have not specified any namespace. That is why it has gone into the default namespace. Then when it is started, the label that is been given, we will come to the labels and selector later on when we create the manifest file. Also, each pod is been given a IP address. This is the cluster internal IP. If you remember, we had created the pod, and we had discussed about the pod, and when we create the pod inside the cluster, it generates the unique ID, and this is the ID that is been generated. Then we also can get more detail about the pod. For example, when it is created, default it has used the default scheduler and other details, right? Similarly, if I describe a deployment object, so kubectl des- describe deployment and name of my deployment. So I should be able to see the detail about the deployment object. So here I can see the detail about the deployment object, right? So here it gives you all the detail about the deployment object. So this is how we can get more details about the objects, and this is important because if we stuck somewhere into the objects and my object is not created properly, then these kind of commands helps to check the status of our deployment pod, service objects and other objects. The pod has been created inside the deployment object, but these deployment objects and the pod is not accessible to the outer world. For accessing the pod from the outside, we require the service objects. So in the next lecture, we try to understand the service object and also how we can expose our pod. So thank you very much for watching this video and stay tuned. Thank you.